everybody, welcome to the SaaS Playbook. I today have with me Rizek, who is the CEO and founder of RQ Metrics. Thank you for joining us today, Rizek.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So today I think we'll have some good conversations about how startups can leverage robust ops systems as an edge, while also we can showcase why companies might need ops and PM experts like you and I. So let's get into it. So Rizek, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of what started you for the setup of RQ Metrics?
Absolutely. As you've mentioned, my name is Rizek. I'm the co-founder and principal consultant here at RQ Metrics. In a nutshell, I work with the technical founders and technical startup teams who are hitting that dangerous moment when things start working out. Maybe they've hit product market fit, but their execution hasn't caught up yet. My focus is on a very specific problem. Usually those founders are brilliant technologists, but the complexity of scaling to production usually creates operational chaos. That chaos in turn burns cash, kills margin, and traps those founders in endless firefighting, which is exactly where I come in. A little bit about my background. I started my career as an engineer, so I understand the language of technical depth and complex systems. And then I transitioned into R&D delivery and project management at a Fortune 500, where I've learned and practiced multi-million-dollar R&D project management and build systems with the execution frameworks of robustness, where we aim to have growth, push us forward and not slow us down. Those are exactly the type of environments where an execution or an ops mistake doesn't only slow you down, it kills your product and it evaporates your cash really quickly.
Yeah.
RQ metrics exist because I kept seeing the same pattern among startup founders and early stage startups is that companies with great ideas and they don't fail because the technology is bad, but some of them fail because of execution decisions that might be made too early and get locked in. And by the time the founders feel the pain, it's usually too expensive or impossible to fix. Now, I don't build the products for those startups. What I do build is a de-risk operational system around it. Think the project management, the strategic planning, the process architecture that turns their visions into predictable, scalable, and fundable business. And then ultimately, my core goal is to help founders move from being overwhelmed product developers back to being visionary leaders as they need to be.
Yeah, and I think where you've got the advantage is you have that technical knowledge and the project management experience. I think that's quite rare to see. You're normally on one side of the fence or the other. You know, I'm project management, I understand technology, but I'm not a software engineer. When it starts, building code, that's not my background. So the fact that you have both of those, I think obviously gives you that advantage.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, you've mentioned a core challenge for technical founders is building in silo without validating the product early enough. So I guess for a founder listening right now, what is the single most crucial or critical non-negotiable step they should take before writing the next line of code to ensure they're building a product that the market actually needs?
Talking to people suffering from the problem that the founder is solving. It sounds simple, but not everybody does this, right? So
Yeah.
before writing any other line of code, founders must clearly know who their ideal customer is and have more conversations than they think they need with those
Yeah.
people that have that customer profile. A tip that I always give to founders is that in those conversations, you should not be pitching your solution. You should listen, you should
Yeah.
observe, and then the focus of those conversations should be on the language that the customer is using to describing the problem, the impact of that problem, and how much money or time did a workaround end up costing for the customer, and then how often does that problem show up? And then in addition to all that, founders must validate what decision the customer is already making without their solution.
Yeah.
Really the easiest sell for a resolution is that a decision that the customer has already made and is stuck on. That's usually the easiest sell for a startup founder coming in and pitching their solution. So my advice there would be to talk to more people than you think you should talk to
Yeah.
who have that problem and listen to how they describe it and how often does it come up. And then after that, a bad founder would spend tens of thousands of dollars building a product, whereas a good founder would spend a couple of hours setting up a landing page with a waiting list and vibe coding an MVP that could be sold. I think the most important piece of validation, especially in that stage, is money. People
Yeah.
are always happy to talk about their problems and talk about issues with their workflow. Very few of them would actually pay for a solution. And that's where money is the ultimate validation of that solution and how startup founders could break out of those silos and start taking in that feedback and talking to their prospective customers.
So it really boils down to good customer research, make sure you're getting the feedback and getting that early on. Don't wait until your product is built. Try and do, like you say, an MVP, get some feedback. The only way I can relate to it is when you go out to clients and you ask them for their business requirements, and rather than the actual requirements, they're going to solutionize mode and they're talking about solutions. It's a similar thing, isn't it? Get that market research and then you can build that up into your product.
And it's hard for founders to do because most of the time they're solution oriented. They want to hear the problem, but they want to pitch the solution. So being in that observation mode where you're just trying to take all that information in without trying to pitch is challenging, but that's where it pays off because you're listening to the end users of your to be solution and trying to understand where actually their pain point is. And for you as a founder, is it really worth going through, or do you need to start making tweaks based on the market feedback that you get?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess once a founder decides to seek early market feedback, what are 1 to 2 practical, repeatable processes that you can implement with your clients to ensure the customer validation is a continuous integrated part of their operations rather than just a one-off event?
Yeah, to start there, I think the biggest mistake any founder can make is at that stage is thinking that validation is a one-off activity. They gather all the market feedback up front and then they develop a product and then everything stays the same.
Yeah.
Instead, as you've mentioned, it should be a continuous effort with built-in feedback loops.
Yeah.
Two of the systems that I help founders implement, especially at that stage, simple but effective. The first one that I do is where customer input, interviews, feedback, verbatims especially, are captured and assigned to features or roadmap initiatives. A lot of the time we hear the feedback, we don't note it down. So capturing all that in one centralized document and then linking that to features or pieces of code that we're working on is important. Think of it like it's the voice of the customer.
Yeah.
And the more repeated the feedback, the more echoed the pain point, the higher in priority the assigned feature that correlates to that specific feedback should be on that team's roadmap.
Yeah.
So the first system is capturing and noting all that feedback. The second system that I use is validation date or cadence, which is a weekly or bi-weekly review where the founder, the head of sales, the CTO, head of product, engineering lead review all that feedback. It's important to distinguish between that and all the other meetings that they usually have. This shouldn't be a roadmap meeting. It shouldn't be a strategy meeting. It's purely talking about feedback, talking about the voice of the customer, and reviewing the most repeated pieces of feedback. Implementing both those systems ensures that validation and feedback are integrated. It's part of continuous improvement and continuous iterations within the team. Some teams take it even further. They commit to not shipping any feature or releasing any new code if it doesn't tie directly to a feedback or customer data point,
Yeah.
which I think is a good strategy. Depends on how regular you're getting feedback. I encourage it as much as you can, but it's one way to ensure that you're building stuff that will deliver value to the end customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of that is ensuring that you're continuously reviewing the roadmap and maybe splitting that into two. One,
Yep.
increased revenue items for your roadmap, and the other one is customer satisfaction. And it's almost having
Absolutely.
a repeatable review of that and making sure, like you say, everybody agrees on the priority. Is it a must have? Is it a should have? And then slotting it in. From my experience, we would put a new version of that platform in every quarter. And like you say, customer feedback is a big part of that. Your focus is on Series A, B startups. What do you think is the biggest operational difference between a pre-seed starter and a Series A starter? And what is the most common mistake founders make when they're trying to scale through that transition?
The biggest difference I'd say that I see between pre-seed, post-seed, and Series A, Series B from an operational standpoint is irreversibility. After Series A, a lot of decisions start to lock in, like hiring, pricing, delivery modes, architecture decisions, and startups start losing that ability to change it later mentality that they usually have when they're a lean, small team
Yeah.
when they're at seed. So that irreversibility, I think, is the biggest differentiator from an operating side. A common mistake when thinking about scaling post Series A usually is scaling activity but not scaling the execution. For example, startup founders can start adding people, they start adding tools, they start adding meetings, they start adding complexities, but they don't change how decisions are made or how the work flows through the systems.
Yeah.
And that's when a lot of the quick decisions taken early on start to become embedded and permanent. Another key difference that usually ends up a common mistake, unfortunately, is the mindset of the founder and their team. In pre-seed or seed stages, the founder can just say, build me this feature, or let's build this feature for the customer, and the team would ship it. Post-Series A, you would see more cases of let's go increase customer retention. And then the team needs a system that helps them analyze, build, and measure how that work is actually done. So that mindset shift is really crucial and is often overlooked with founders going from seed stages, seed to Series A, Series B, especially as the team grows larger and ideally the revenue is getting to increase as well. It's one of the common mistakes and the common operational complexities that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I know from my experience with that as well is the processes start getting locked in more. You end up with more governance forums and approvals that are needed, and things tend to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, and especially at that stage, a lot of the decisions prior to that are usually done with a, go fast mentality, right? And we'll fix it later.
Yeah.
But that at that stage, a lot of those get embedded in and they start becoming permanent, and that will fix it later stage never comes.
No.
So those not so well thought out decisions or not data driven decisions or spur of the moment decisions get locked in, and later on when founders start feeling pain, that's when it's very expensive and sometimes impossible to reverse what they did.
Yeah, the technical debt starts getting out of control.
Exactly.
I know you're an advocate of replacing overwhelming KPI lists with just 2 to 3 meaningful North Star metrics. How do you guide a client to identify those truly meaningful metrics that are tied directly to their 3 to 5 year strategic vision? And what's an example of a common vanity metric that you immediately just want to cut out?
So founders usually come to me with what I call a cockpit dashboard, right? They have tons of metrics, lights flashing at you, and all that leads to confusion. They think they need to track everything, which means that they react to everything, which burns money, it burns time, and it burns their focus. What I do to develop a North Star metrics is I like to work backwards from their 5 year vision. What capabilities does the business must have to meet that vision? It might be more predictable delivery. It might be higher user utilization. It might be faster cycle time. From there, I worked with the team to develop metrics that reflect those capabilities. And that's how it's tied to the vision of the company in 5 years.
Yeah.
And to answer your question about a metric that I immediately cut, I like to classify those as ego metrics, like,
Yeah.
for example, total registered users or total features shipped. I see those metrics usually as meaningless. They
Yeah.
feel productive, but they hide predictability and delivery issues. Like, for example, how good would two users be, of which 70% might be on free trial and 15% are inactive.
Yeah.
So those metrics cause confusion and they don't reflect the actual state of the team or the actual state of delivery.
Yeah.
And then another note I'd like to say about metrics is that metrics drive behavior and they incentivize the team to act in a specific way, intentionally or unintentionally, which is why, choosing the right KPIs must be a focused activity that's aligned with the vision of the company and then the predictable value delivery
Yeah.
because those metrics incentivize people to act in a separate way to meet those metrics. So again, I think of total registered users, total shipped, anything that has to do with ego
Yeah.
metrics is the first I would cut, and I would focus on where we see the company in 5 years, what is it capable of, and from there I would start driving the metrics that would reflect the actual health of the operations of that company.
Yeah. Sounds sensible. There's no use having a registered user if they're not actually using. I think the inactive piece is a
Exactly.
massive one, right? I think about the platforms and the apps I sign up to. I don't use them all. So it's irrelevant me being on there if I'm not using it.
Exactly, and it doesn't give any more or less insight to the engineering team or to the founder about the state of that users. It might
No.
indicate that they might know that their app is not as useful anymore as they thought, or
Yeah.
that they were running an exceptional welcome offer, but after that they've had issues keeping users on those side of the insights that they might have. But I don't see the value of having that as your north star or your
No.
ideally tracked KPI.
Yeah. No, makes sense. And then the goal of North Star metric is to clearly show how specific action items impact the key results. Can you walk us through a quick case study or example of how refining a client's metrics immediately changed their team's focus and improved execution?
Yep, sure. So a team I was working with was using one of those ego metrics, and it
Yeah.
was the number of story points completed per sprint. So what would be the incentive for the team? It would be to close more stories. It wouldn't be the quality or the predicted delivery of value to the customer.
Yeah.
So how we changed that is we started layering in compounded KPIs that are made of a formula of two or more data points. So it's not a single data point to KPI. It's a formula of 2 to 3 data points per one KPI, including the deviation between planned story points and completed story points, which indicates predictability. And then another data point would be customer success data from issues about the delivered features. Especially that factor, it shows that the more customers have issues with that shipped feature, the lower the KPI. So
Yeah.
the incentive for the team changed from I need to ship more, I need to close more stories, is that I need to put more thought into those stories because I don't want to have issues later on, and then having those issues would lower my KPI. So it shows that I'm performing
Yeah.
worse than I am. So this is a good case of how setting the wrong KPI would incentivize the team to a different behavior. And as I mentioned, it might be unintentional, but it does drive us because that's how we measure our performance with those KPIs. So KPI development should be an intentional activity that founders think through and try to understand what the incentives and what the influence of those KPIs would be on the team. And back to our previous question is that I don't need 20 KPIs to tell me how the team is doing. I need 2 to 3 North Star metrics
Yeah.
that reflect the status and the health of my team and how we're delivering value.
Yeah. And with that example that you've given, I bet you overall the speed is probably quicker because if they've got 20 story points but they rush through it, they make mistakes, they then have a bug ticket that they now need to fix, that's another 10 story points. You
Yep.
add all of that up, it's probably going to take a lot longer than them taking their time doing the 20 initially and no reruns or rework of that. So overall, the efficiency is probably quicker, right?
Exactly. No, absolutely right. And another thing is that at the end of the day, we're shipping, or a team of software developers is shipping features. They're not shipping story points. They're not shipping sprints. So those are methodologies or frameworks that we use to make us more efficient. Their goal isn't to close more stories or to be excellent at sprints. The goal is to leverage story points and sprints to help us deliver more value, to help us close our technical debt, to help us get more features out to the customer. So
Yeah.
having those frameworks or those agile methodology artifacts as the center of our performance measurement is a bit flawed. And as you've mentioned, it increases inefficiency within the team, it increases rework, and on the long term, it creates more operational headache than it solves with
Yeah.
trying to make the workflow go smoother.
Well, that's it. It's about the customer satisfaction as well, isn't it? Getting it right first time, and not having to then go back with another version of the requirement because it wasn't done quite right in the first place. And whether that's you catch it up front before the customer sees it with UAT, but then it might cause a delay because you hadn't anticipated that extra work. Whatever way you look at it, it normally impacts the customer if you don't get it right first time.
Absolutely, and that also ties into the previous discussion about getting feedback from the customer and having it as a continuous activity that we're, teams are doing sprint over sprint or cycle over cycle. That they're getting the feedback, they're getting the customer voice in because it helps them reduce that rework as well. It helps them validate that this is what the customer wants, help them validate that the time that they're building all the software, all the code, all the apps is going in the right place.
Yeah, and once you've got that, that customer confidence, then that's where the cross sell comes in. You expand the product, and the financials and the ROI obviously increases as a result of that. So
Yeah.
when building the 3 to 5 year strategic vision, what are the key components of the framework you use to ensure it's not just an aspirational document, but an actionable plan that can be broken down into quarterly goals, daily operations?
So when doing that, we usually start with a vision statement. Where do we see the company in 3 to 5 years? That's our aspiring goal looking at it.
Yeah.
From there, we break it down in what's called an operational pyramid, right? So we start with the vision and then we start breaking it down. The first layer down are the operational pillars. So what are my focus areas? Sales, marketing, development, revenue, customer success. So these are my strategic or operational pillars.
Yeah.
From there, I map out the KPIs. What KPI I'm tracking for each of those pillars and where do they need to be? Again, we are trying to use focus North Star KPIs. We're not trying to have 20 KPIs per strategic pillar, more so two or three.
Yeah.
Those KPIs should reflect the health, as you move forward with the plan of the team and the company. And then the last layer of that operational pillars are enablers. What do I need to make this happen? Do I need tools? Do I need resources? Do I need external, you know, external help, consultants,
Yeah.
whatever the enablers are to get us to those KPIs. So when I meet those KPIs, I get to my operational pillars, and then eventually, get into that aspiration status in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's one document, which is the operational pyramid. Another one would be objectives. So a key thing that we think about are strategic bets that must come true for us to meet that. So we write 3 to 4 statements that say we must have, this much revenue. This must happen. We must have lower churn. We must have a faster cycle. We must expand our portfolio to include this feature that complements our product. We must go and develop a new go-to-market strategy that helps us break into the European or MENA or American markets. These
Yeah.
are objectives, are strategic bets that we need to come. They need to happen, or they must come true for us to get to our vision. And
Yeah.
then on the opposite side of that, I also like to map out constraints and risk because proactive risk management is essential in that case, and it's essential for any strategy development. Is thinking about what could go wrong, and then if it does go wrong, what should I do to fix it? Now
Yeah.
it might not go according to plan, but that proactive thought of fixing that issue when and if it becomes an issue makes the response time for teams 20, 30 faster than if they haven't thought about it. So I think about constraints. What is the weakest link in my chain? What could break first in my plan, and what could go wrong? And then the
Yeah.
last thing, um, from an operational standpoint, is that we take all that, the objectives, and then we start breaking them down. So start with, annual priorities and how they break down into quarterly objectives, and then how those objectives break down into weekly goals, and then how those goals break into daily tasks.
Yeah.
That gives clarity to team members because when they're working day to day, they can map out how their activity now fits into the 3 to 5 year vision of the company and why it matters. So it also helps with that clarity. It helps with alignment. Everybody knows what we're working towards. Everybody knows where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing there is clear objectives, making sure you've got the success criteria so you know what
Yep.
you're working towards, and then on the opposite side as well, trying to predict the risks, potential risks that could come up. And I guess with those risks, you're probably doing a mitigation plan to say if this materializes, we do X, and if this, comes about, you then know exactly what that plan is if anything does materialize.
Exactly. And the process of thinking this through, the process of planning that out is more important than the plan itself.
Yes.
Because 90% of the time, 95% of the time, things don't go according to plan. So
Yeah.
it's okay if the plan changes, but the activity of planning gives founders, gives teams the opportunity to think through those situations, put mitigation plans in place, think of, what's the worst case scenario and how should I react to that? And as I mentioned, it reduces the response time. So the act of planning, the act of proactively identifying risks is more important than the plan itself. It's more
Yeah.
important than any of the other artifacts that they have to come up with when they're doing a strategic plan.
Yeah. And I guess that moves us nicely on to a topic we've spoken about previously, which is firefighting, right? So
Yeah.
startups often get stuck in a reactive firefighting mode. And I've done it myself, I've been there. What is the first operational system you put in place with a client to transition them from being a reactive firefighting mode to proactive? And how quickly can they expect to see a change in their team's bandwidth?
So first thing that I do is I try to get decision clarity. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is I try to map out the quantity of the decisions that they're making, the impact, and then map them out to one single owner, one single decision maker.
Yeah.
When I put that in place, teams usually feel the relief of that. I want to say between 2 to 4 weeks, and that's not because their work disappears or not because things have becoming easier, but it's because the uncertainty drops. We have clear
Yes.
ownership of decisions. We know the clear impact of those decisions, and you don't have that fog in their fog, in their clarity. You understand how everything maps out to, and a factor of that is what you probably know in project management is like the RACI chart is who's
Yeah.
responsible, who should be informed, how does that map to accountability? So that's the first thing that I like to do is try to boil everything down to decision making. Who
Yeah.
should make the decisions? How many decisions are we taking? Because there's always that case of decision fatigue. People are taking too many decisions. A good chunk of them are insignificant. They don't
Yeah.
make or break anything, but people spend time, they spend effort, they spend money trying to make those decisions. So I try to get that decision clarity framework in place.
Yeah.
Plus a priority matrix or prioritization method. My advice to startup founders is, prioritize ruthlessly. Like you should
Yeah.
always be prioritizing, you should always be revisiting your priority list, and you should always be thinking about how you're prioritizing. That prioritization and having a clear system on how you prioritize adds to that clarity. So that with the decision.
Yeah.
usually give team the initial 2 to 4 week relief while we start working on more strategic, more proactive system, more project management system, more planning systems to put in place. But that usually helps us stop the firefighting, trying to understand what is important right now, what should we focus on right now, dedicate resources that way, and what's more of a distraction, what's causing, and who's making the decisions, who's calling the shots.
Yeah, 100%. The RACI, it's quite interesting really when you put that together at the start of the project, how much people think it's someone else's responsibility. When you start working down the plan and you're discussing, right, who is responsible, who's accountable, it drives so much conversation and differing opinions that you then realise how important that document is, because
Yeah.
it gets everybody aligned. When you put that document together, it brings out those conversations at the beginning. So like you say, when you then get to a firefighting issue, there's none of this going round batting between one person and another. You've got the document, you can refer to it, it was what was agreed, and that just makes it a lot quicker, doesn't it? So yeah, I definitely can resonate with that one.
Yeah, and the challenge that I usually see, especially in smaller startup teams, is that because they're a small, lean team, they don't have the team dynamics of a Fortune 500 or
Yeah,
of a large enterprise. So they haven't worked through a situation where they might have disagreements and then one
yeah,
person is the decision maker. And that's really important because you'll have a lot of disagreements, but you need to know on technical decisions, the CTO is the ultimate decision
yeah,
maker. On commercial decisions, you go to the CEO. In early stages with smaller teams, that is a bit challenging because it has a different dynamic. But to
yeah,
your point, it's important to define ownership, to define decision making, framework that says this decision is taken by this person and he's accountable for it, and that gives the whole team clarity and give them a framework so when more people join in and they scale their startup, they're still using the same framework and everybody follows in on the same decision making criteria.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And then obviously, I think you said briefly before that you use reusable frameworks as much as possible. So, such as a 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan. How important is it for a scaling startup to invest time in creating these standardized operational frameworks? And what is the risk of not doing so?
It's extremely important. And smaller teams get the advantage of doing that before they scale, before they grow, is that they have systems in place that are scalable, that they help them grow. They don't have to repeat the work when they're a team of five, when they're a team of 50.
Yeah,
The risk of not doing so, unfortunately, is silent. People don't notice it
no,
until something breaks. It's like a death by a thousand paper cuts, right?
yeah,
The symptoms of it is that they usually have a slower delivery. You would see the founder being more operational than needed. They stay in
mm-hmm.
the weeds for more time. They spend more effort into day-to-day operations. They see some of their margins erode because they're not as efficient of a team. So there isn't a single failure that you can point to, but all those symptoms together signal that they don't have repeatable systems, they don't have scalable systems. And what that leads to is that every new hire or every new customer forces the company to reinvent itself and to create a new ad hoc system that they have to use for this customer and then they have to do when this person
Yeah,
onboards. So it doesn't feel painful for smaller startup teams, but as they grow, it becomes brutal, and that's why I always urge to
yeah,
start thinking about those systems. And they don't need to be complex systems. They don't need to have a lot of overhead, as we've
no,
mentioned. They should have clear objectives, clear ownership, clear execution framework, understanding what the priorities are. Those systems are scalable, and they help startup founders and startup teams to scale faster and to avoid those small operational mishaps that could lead to a larger failure way down the road.
Yeah, I've been involved in creating frameworks for startup company and a scale up company, and it not only standardizes the processes for the customers, especially with regards to client onboarding, but it also standardizes the processes for the internal teams as well, so that every customer is getting the same processes and treatment. So for a project manager, for example, we might start off with a standardized project plan, and then if there's any bespoke features, we're just adding onto that standardized plan. So all the project managers are working with the customers pretty much in a similar way, and the customers are getting the same experience no matter who they're dealing with internally. So I definitely think it reduces the risk. It means that things don't get missed, and then it gives obviously a better experience for the customer. So I totally concur with that one. It definitely is a massive win for any business. Yeah, definitely. And then just finally, for a CEO leading a Series A B company, what percentage of their time should they ideally be spending on pure operational structure and efficiency versus product development or fundraising, in your opinion?
10%.
No, and I guess with AI now as well, there's so much automation that can be happening with
Yeah.
regards to operational processes. So, whether they're using that now or whether they were gearing up for it, I think there's definitely a lot of efficiency that's going to be had with regards to AI. So yeah, hopefully we see that coming through the pipeline. Yeah, yeah, and I guess that goes back to your repeatable processes, right? If you build in the right way and you've got those frameworks in place that are repeatable, then it's something that AI and automation can easily come in and make efficiencies. You're right, with like agentic AI, especially with software development. Companies are using that more and more now with, reading business requirements, writing user stories, looking at doing code reviews. It's definitely revolutionary. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, that brings us to an end of the podcast today, Rizek. Thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an amazing conversation. So I'd just like to say thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you so much.